Hello students, this is Dr. Winkler again. We're moving right along in this course. This is lecture number 8. This is for ancient civilization, as I'm sure you know. One of the things I want to say about the structure of the class right now, we were given instructions that as you teach a world civilization course, that a certain percentage of it should deal with Asia and Africa, and a certain percentage should deal with Europe. We were told that about 30% of the class should deal with Asia and Africa. As you know, and having looked at some of the other lectures now, we've been dealing with the Middle East, Asia. We've been dealing with the Eastern Mediterranean, also Asia. Africa, that's Egypt. Mesopotamia, of course, that's also Asia. Now we're going to go to China, and then later we're going to go to India. Once we're through with those areas, once we've advanced beyond that, then we'll start concentrating for the remainder of the course on Europe. But that's simply giving an idea of how we're supposed to proceed. When we were talking about Mesopotamia and Egypt, remember I said there's contact between these people. One of the theories as to the development of writing in Egypt, for example, is that they saw that people were writing in Mesopotamia and they said, that's a good idea. We can do the same thing. So there's information going back and forth. You do find a few clay tablets in cuneiform in Egypt. So they're actually exchanging ideas as well. Now this is quite different when we discuss China. China is isolated. China is a long, long ways from Mesopotamia and Egypt. It's very challenging areas, countryside. You have deserts, some of the highest mountains in the world, and vast distances. Now later on they're going to establish the Silk Road, which is just kind of a thread several thousand miles long, running from China over to the Middle East. And later on the goods you get across that goes over into Europe as well. But even later on when that's established, can we say that's a very tenuous thread? In reality, therefore, we can argue that China and Chinese civilizations develop independently from the kinds of things that are happening in Mesopotamia and also in Egypt. So that's what I have right here, isolated, independent development. As we're seeing a pattern here, are we not? That there's a tendency for civilizations to be established, grow up, and develop and prosper along the banks of rivers. I kind of talked about this earlier. It's a source of water, source of fish, source of transportation. And if you have something like the Nile that benignly floods, you have a source of fertility of your soil. So there are good reasons why civilizations develop along rivers. This is true of China as well. Okay. I guess this works fairly well. We have two major rivers that develop along here. Notice this is the Huanghe, which is the Yellow River. Yellow River going up like this. This is the Shantung Peninsula. Down here we have the Yangtze River, which starts very high mountains, very close to where the Yellow River begins. And then it comes down, as you can see, a very long route down into the ocean. So usually, sometimes we say there's a triangle here. Let me see if I can get a map of the Zhou. Oh, I'm not doing a very, very good job here. First thing you do with your lecture is start out by looking incompetent and foolish. So you can get a map on that. As to, okay, yeah, I always end up with the wrong thing. How about in this direction? Okay. Notice we have a map of the rivers here. These are the true rivers. The earliest civilizations actually develops in a lower stretch of this area. We'll talk about the Shang in just a little while. Now let's get a map up here so we can refer to it if we need to, which is largely here associated. Remember, the Shantung Peninsula is just north of that, is where the Yellow River goes into the sea, and while the Yangtze comes down here farther south. Can we say, therefore, both of the rivers are associated with the early development of Chinese civilization. The Yellow River is sometimes called China's sorrows. Say, well, if civilization develops around it and it's used to water for your crops, why would it be so sorrowful? Well, it's floods. It has a big, big problem with flooding. We already mentioned this at the Tigris-Euphrates in Mesopotamia. But China, even today, has serious problems with flooding. Even though the Chinese, the modern Chinese, have built significant dams and trying to harness the river, still at times it essentially can cause problems, sometimes many problems. Notice they come out, both rivers come out of some very high mountains. And it does depend on the amount of snow, when the snow melts, how rapidly it melts, then you can have some significant floods. The reason why the Yellow River is called the Yellow River is that there is some significant soil in this area, which I'll discuss more in just 1 minute, called loess. Can I show you some loess soil? Okay. How about 2 S's in loess? And boy, I'm having a good start today. You're going to have to put up with me for a while and watch me flounder around, unfortunately. It's a yellow soil. Well, let's not be rocket scientists to figure this out. The soil along the Yellow River can be very deep. As I will revisit here in just a few minutes, it can be like 200 or 300 feet deep. So if you have an area that's subject to floods, floods are obviously going to wash down soil. And if you have loess soil, which is this yellowish soil, as you can see from these photographs, let's get a bigger one here, that you can see from these photographs, then in reality, some of that silt is clearly going to end up in the river. And I guess as you watch the river flow, you stand along the banks, you look down there and say, it looks kind of yellow. What shall we name the river? We'll name it the Yellow River. Here's a silly aside, but I got to mention this. Many years ago, my brother was living in Texarkana, Arkansas. So right on the border between Texas and Arkansas. And I got the flight. I think the connection was in Denver. Anyway, I flew from Denver down to, I believe it was Dallas. From Dallas, I took a little hop over to Texarkana. Of course, I'm flying from Denver to Dallas. And I looked down there and I saw, wow, there's this really interesting river. And look along the banks, it looks red. I'm going, I wonder if that's the Red River. Pretty good guess on my part. Same thing is true in China. You do have the Yellow River and China's sorrows because of the extent of the floods. We often remember, it's very important to remember in Chinese history, is they have a very large population. Even way back in the ancient time frames, when we can talk about the population of Rome at its height being in 60 million range, something like that. In other words, we tend to think of it in the terms of tens of millions. At exactly the same time, during the Han Dynasty in China, we can probably talk about 200 to 300 million people. Man, that is a big difference. Well, why are there so many more people in China than there are in other places? Can we simply say more food, more people? If you have more food, people live longer, you're healthier, you have bigger families, and the families tend to have bigger families. Well, we can say that is a very, very large, if not the major factor, in the large population which we see in China. They grow two major food crops. Remember, largely in Mesopotamia, it's wheat. Largely in Egypt, it's wheat. In China, in the northern areas, remember the Yellow River is farther north, we usually talk about wheat. Now, there's a problem with wheat. Wheat's very good food. You all know about this. And I remember I gave you a big pitch that people eat bread and eat grains all the time. We still do that today. But there's a problem with wheat. It has a tendency to degrade the soil. It's hard on soil fertility. If you have a field and you plant it in wheat, then if you plant it in wheat this year and next year, you probably have a pretty good crop. But it doesn't take too long, just a few years. And in planting wheat, now the soil is getting robbed of nutrients. So your wheat crop goes down. After a period of years, you're going to be in big trouble. You might not be able to grow anything. Now, there's ways, and we'll discuss this later when we get to the Middle Ages, there are ways of trying to keep soil fertility up. One is crop rotation. One is having fallow and then growing a grain here. Next year you switch. This year is grain, and this year is fallow. So we rotate the crops. In doing that, you have to have a certain amount of acreage, which you do not plant in any given year. Can we say, therefore, fertility per acre using wheat under these circumstances is not as productive? Now, there's something different about northern China. They have loose soil. Remember I said in certain areas this is like 200 to 300 feet deep. It's easy to work. It blows away. It washes away. So even with simple plows, which we see in the ancient world, you can work the ground quite well. And then, even though wheat does denigrate the soil, there's so much of it. So what if you lose an inch or two of fertility on the top? You can work down through this for many centuries and still be able to plant the same acre of ground and still bring in a very good crop of wheat. So in this sense, Lus is a spectacular crop that helps the Chinese maintain a large food production, which is a very big factor in their population. Now, however, when you and I think about China, we don't usually think about wheat. We usually think about rice. Let me go back to a map of China. The development of wheat agriculture is a little bit later than excuse me, I'm saying this backwards. The development of rice agriculture is a little bit later than the development of wheat agriculture. We usually think about rice in China. I keep saying this backwards. We usually think about wheat in the northern areas of China. We more often think about rice in the southern areas here. Now, if we had a map that included Asia, or more of Asia, of course, you know what's right here is Vietnam. And farther south, well, let's go to the Mekong River, which is just south of. Can I get a bigger map? Let's try that one. Just south of China, right down here. I like this one because it's more colorful. Okay, China's right here, and the Mekong River comes down here. It's the major river, obviously, forming a border with Laos, goes through Cambodia, and empties through southern Vietnam into the ocean. The river, we think, is where rice cultivation first started, at least in this area. But nearby is China. If there's going to be a very big breakthrough down here in any kind of crop cultivation, it's not going to be terribly surprising that the Chinese are going to learn about it quite soon. Rice is one of your, shall we say, fantastic crops. It is really quite remarkable what you can do with rice. I'm sure you're familiar with rice paddies. The rice, you have dikes and you have rice fields, rice paddies. As you look at the water there, it's just a few inches deep. As you look at the water there, you look at it, it doesn't look like it's moving. But with very careful management of the fields, the water is very slowly flowing from paddy to paddy. When you want to harvest the rice, you want the water out, and then you can come in and get it up much more easily. Rice is such a spectacular crop that routinely you can get 2 crops per year on the same acre. That's very impressive. Under certain circumstances, certain conditions, in some of these areas, you can get as many as 3 crops per year on the same acre. You really can't do that with wheat, but you can do this with rice. I know what you're thinking is, aha, if you have rice cultivation on the same acre of ground, 2 and even 3 crops a year, that's going to denigrate the soil. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Unfortunately for the argument, but fortunately for rice cultivations, that's really not the case. For whatever reason, the Chinese, the Southeast Asians are very, very good. You take out the rice kernels, of course, that's what you're eating. But the rice plant, you take it and you put it back in the field. That does have a tendency to keep fertility of the soil a little bit higher. But one of the big factors is probably the fact that rice grows standing in water. And water brings in nutrients. So in reality, as many nutrients are going into the ground as you're taking out to grow the rice. So you can plant over and over again the same acre of land without a diminishing return on the rice, without destroying the soil. Wow. Talk about a fantastic plant. Let me make an interesting comparison. A lot of times we as Americans look at China and say, China's overpopulated. China is. There's an awful lot of people there. And the Chinese now, for decades, 3 generations, have been trying to come to grips with how they can control their population and how they control their growth. But I'm not sure we should always call them overpopulated. You see, the United States has one of the most brilliant wheat growing areas on the planet, the American Midwest. You have nice cold air coming out of Canada, which is good for the soil in the wintertime. In the summertime, you have the nice warm air coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, allowing your grain to ripen. It's virtually ideal. And the Great Plains produces very large amounts of wheat. Now, the problem with that is, remember, wheat is hard on the soil. Over time, the really good deep soil in the Midwest has gone down and down and down. Years ago, when I was in college taking geology classes, the professor was saying, in some areas we're down to topsoil that's about 1 foot. Now, I don't know what's going to happen if you finally use up all the topsoil. And hopefully that hasn't happened yet. It won't happen in the near future. However, let's go back and look at this argument. You see, we're feeding ourselves. There's over 300 million Americans. We're feeding ourselves and we're exporting an awful lot of food in the process. That's very impressive. But to do so, we're denigrating our soil. We're hurting our environment. While China, with a lot more people, is feeding a lot more people without the destruction of their environment. By that argument, the Chinese are actually not as overpopulated as the United States is. It's kind of interesting. But let's not forget wheat and rice, extremely important for development of civilization and large population base. For many years, historians of Chinese history, Chinese historians themselves, and archaeologists we're wondering if the Shang dynasty actually existed. I mean, there's old stories talking about it, but the clear documentation was a little bit challenging until archaeologists started finding oracle bones. So we get Shang. Can you get the Shang up here? Remember, the Shang is essentially in this area. Let's look at the Shang oracle bones. What they have found is bones that largely come from cattle. Remember, they are domesticating not just plants, but animals as well. And what they apparently would do would take part of the bones. I think most commonly would be the scapula. It's that back here from the animal. And you would take the bone out once, of course, you slaughtered the animal. You've eaten the meat. And now you take the bone out. And when you take the bone out, they would treat it in a certain manner. And sometimes they would drill a hole in it. What I'm not seeing here is the hole. But they would drill holes in it. And then you would place hot metal, like a hot copper wire, something like that into the hole. And because the bone had been treated in a certain manner, it would crack. Can I show you a few cracks here? That's got a few cracks. That's got a few cracks. So obviously, we got cracks here as well. Now, what does that mean? Now, you know who a soothsayer is, or a shaman, a religious leader in a society. And the shaman would look at the bones and see how they were cracked. And they would make predictions on the basis of that. So we date these for radiocarbon dating, and it clearly goes back to the Shang. We have direct archaeological evidence that a civilization did exist. Not only did they have oracle bones, they had writing. I don't know any Chinese at all. I can't read a road sign in Chinese. I know nothing. But as you look at these examples, which I'm pulling up for you here, you can see that there's a writing structure here. Now, these are pictographs. As you all know, Chinese writing is a very stylized and a very advanced form of pictographs. This is not modern Chinese, but I have been told that the similarities are such that if you are a scholar, they might even have classes in this at the university, how to read Shang writing, and you can get in here and start reading this and have a pretty good idea of what's going on. I mean, okay, clearly an organization, clearly a religion, and writing. I don't think there's any real doubt that the Shang existed. This is not a myth. The Shang dynasty was there. Now, since we am introducing writing, so we get Chinese writing here. Let's take a look at Chinese writing. I think it looks nice. I'm certainly no art critic, but it looks very, very, very nice. Now, I've been told when young children are learning to write, read, and of course write Chinese, that, shall we say, penmanship is extremely important. I don't think I would have become literate in China because my penmanship was always very bad. If you have thousands of these, and you make even the slightest mistake, it can be confusing as people are reading these. I have been told that you need to have need to be able to recognize about 2,000 of these to read a newspaper. I've also been told that if you're university students, like yourself, are using more advanced texts, like you do yourself in this class and many other classes, you probably need to recognize more like 8,000. Now, if they're pictographs, highly stylized, why wouldn't you just forget about that? The length of time it becomes involved to become literate is monumental. It takes many years. I've never been to China. I'd have talked to some people who've been to China to get a better understanding. What do they do for a typewriter? What do they do for a computer? If you have many hundreds that you have to master. I was told once, and I hope this is accurate, that at least on certain symbols, the Chinese have found it convenient to simplify them so you have a much better chance of being able to use a small amount of effort to put materials out that can be recognized. But even at that, it still has to be cumbersome. Why wouldn't you change this? Well, people say, well, maybe you don't have the right idea. Well, the Chinese have been in contact. Remember, it develops virtually independently. But by the time you get to the age of exploration, 14th, 15th centuries, there's much more contact by sea from Europeans to China. In the 1500s, the 16th century, we see we see Christian missionaries, largely Jesuits, going to China and trying to convert them to Christianity. Of course, they bring written texts with them, which include the Bible and other things as well. So for hundreds of years, the Chinese have been exposed to the idea of an alphabet. One symbol, one sound. Wouldn't that be enormously simple compared to this kind of writing? I would think so. Well, sometimes in my class at this point, I ask my students, why do you think they don't change it? Good answers. A lot of times I get comments including, well, it's traditional, it's been around for a long time. And there's much about the Chinese civilization, which is traditional, so you want to keep it. That's a factor. I've already talked about the artistic quality. Look right here, this stuff looks pretty good to me. It looks better if you have red and black. You have more than one color. Well, are there practical reasons why we can go to an alphabet? I know you know that we talk about dialects. The major dialect around Beijing, wait a minute, the one down by Hong Kong is Cantonese. The one around Beijing is Mandarin. Since the capital is Beijing, the dialect up there is kind of the standard dialect. However, we need to be careful. Even though we call the various speech patterns in China dialects, in reality they are different languages. Sure, they're related to each other. They're tonal. They have a lot of things in common. But it doesn't mean that they are mutually intelligible. There's a Chinese woman who lives up the street. I'm fairly good friends with her husband. And she's from Hong Kong. She speaks Cantonese. And he said the way she put it is this. The people speaking Cantonese who are talking to the people up in Beijing, they're speaking Mandarin. She says it's like ducks talking to chickens. You do not understand each other. There are what? 20 different languages in China? That's not including dialects, which can be very difficult to understand. So let's go back and take a look at this. Are you going to introduce an alphabet and use a different structure for all of these different areas? So if you're living in Beijing, you're in a government office, or you're living in Hong Kong, involved in international trade or trade throughout China, you are going to run into some severe problems because language. However, if you stay with the Chinese writing, these very highly stylized pictographs, you can write a letter in Beijing and send it anywhere in China, and it can be easily read. You can print a book. You can print a newspaper. You can have the media connect very easily because of this writing system. The reverse is true. You can be living anywhere in China. Print a newspaper, print a book, write a letter, and send it anywhere else. And this can be readily and easily understood. Can we say, even though it's cumbersome, I have no doubt about that, there are still some very good reasons why the Chinese want to keep their form of writing. Get more records when we get to the Zhou. Notice it's spelled with a ZH, but it's pronounced Zhou. How do I know that? In graduate school, taking Chinese history, the professor gets, boy, this guy was good. Oh, he was good. Encyclopedic mind, knows everything about China. He says you pronounce that Zhou. Okay, so spelled kind of screwy. As we take a look at pronunciation of Chinese names, there's actually more than one standard. Some people have gone in and listened to Chinese and tried to use our understanding of the sound system to write it into an alphabet which you and I can identify. Why something that's pronounced Zhou would end up being spelled with ZH, Zhou, or something like that, I'm not prepared to say. But if I'm saying Zhou, you're thinking, ZH. Well, the Zhou. Can we say society in China is artistic and very sophisticated? The Zhou are very good at metalworking. Some of these things are absolutely magnificent. Metalworking in different kinds of metals, but largely bronze. Stunning kind of work. Many years ago, how did I get moved over there? Many years ago, they had a Chinese exhibit down at BYU. I urge you, if you have an artistic bent, and you really ought to enjoy art because it's so much fun. The Art Museum over at BYU has an area in there. And back in the day, they used to bring various exhibits. They brought the Etruscan exhibit. They brought the Masada exhibit. They brought the Chinese exhibit, and in which they brought numerous artifacts. They had it on more than one level. You'd have them up on the main level, and there's a basement down there, and there's rooms in the basement. It was worth your time, and it's worth your price of entry. The entrance, I should say, because when you were there, you got to see some magnificent things. I remember seeing some of these that impressed me to a very great extent. Now, you know how a lot of these things are created. You originally make the item in wax. You have to be very, very careful to carve it ever so discreetly in wax. And then you take clay. You have to be very careful that it fits very well. And then when the clay dries, you essentially have a mold on the inside. Then you heat the clay, the wax inside pours out, and then you fill this with liquid bronze. You have to be extremely careful that you know exactly how to do it, because it's got to fill all these little nooks and crannies. Some of these things are literally what I consider to be fantastic. I don't know how I shifted off over here, but I clearly have done so. I remember one box, I guess it was tolled candles or something. You can imagine you go outside and your light is a lantern. And of course, you can hold it in your hand if you want to, your candle. You've got a problem there if you have a little bit of a breeze. So a lantern, you want to put it in a box. There was one of these things. It was so exquisite. It stuck in my memory all these years. That it actually had this box with little holes. We need the holes for the light to escape, but you also need the holes for the oxygen to get in to keep the flame going. Now, rather than just having holes in the side of this thing, it actually had little piece of bronze metal coming out that was twisted. Now, as a matter of practicality, you probably don't need to do this. As a matter of aesthetics, it's absolutely gorgeous. It was I was amazed by the workmanship. I was amazed by the beauty. Now, before I get off the discussion of the BYU Chinese exhibit, very unfortunately, they didn't know how to bid on it. They underbid. In other words, they said that wrong. They overbid. They paid more money for it than they got in return. Like a third of the people in Utah saw it. It was a smash hit, but they still lost, I heard multiple millions of dollars. And it's been very, very difficult to even consider about bringing another one in when over many years of time, you're paying off your losses. As much as it's awful for me to say, to me it was worth it for them to lose that amount of money because what I saw was so dazzling. Chariots, weapons, you get horses now dragging small carts, and you use that as a weapons platform to shoot arrows or throw spears. So they're advanced technology, not just metalworking, but also military technology. They're using crossbows, which have a very advanced trigger mechanism. So we're talking about a very clever society. Then we get into something a little bit more challenging. The Warring States period. So if I can give you a map on this. How about warring? Warring States. Wow, I'm having fun today. Period in China. And let's see if I can get a map for you. Going back to my graduate course in Chinese history, going back to the super egghead professor, you expect some very strong arguments from people, don't you? Good old academic arguments. And he said, the best way to understand the Warring States period is a free-for-all in a dark room. It's like WWF. A bunch of big guys go in, you turn off the lights. And then you duke it out, and the last man standing, of course, is the winner. There are times when we've got 7 or 8 different states that are fighting each other. Why would this go on so long? Can't you get along with each other? Well, I guess not. On the other hand, you think you have an advantage. And in the advantage, you say, okay, I can take out some other people. The other people look at you and go, whoa, he's too big and mean. So we'll gang up on him, 2 or 3 of us, and we'll take him on. Then one of those states starts getting more powerful, and they start ganging up on them. You see, it's extremely challenging under these circumstances to actually come out with a victory. You think after a while, everybody just get tired of it. Loss of manpower, loss of resources, plundering of areas, that eventually it would wear out. But as you can see, despite all those factors involved, you actually end up this lasting for almost 200 years. That's a long, long time to have internal discord. As we look at this, notice the red right here? That's the Qin. Eventually, as you can see, it's kind of a fun map, isn't it? Because it changes colors. Eventually, as you can see over time, the Qin grow and eventually take over the Chu. And eventually, what ends the Warring State period is when the Qin, also known as Qin, are actually able to control the entirety of China. So we'll talk about the Qin or Qin in just a few minutes. But one of the great accomplishments of the Qin or Qin is simply to bring peace at last to China. Before we get into that, I'm getting to kind of the political realm. Let's go a little bit more into the intellectual realm. Let's talk about some of the great Chinese philosophers. Confucius. Confucius is among of all ancient Chinese philosophers. He's one of those that is the best received. What we have surviving from him directly are analects. Roughly translated, these are conversations. We're going to see this later again when we talk about the Greeks. We're going to see the Greeks, primarily Plato, writing in dialogues. And as I'm going to explain later when we get to it, he's using Socrates as a major character in almost all of his dialogues. Can we say that's a good way to talk? Yes, it is. Now, the trouble with Confucius is that in some cases we do not have complete texts. It's like walking into a conversation. You might walk through the first part not understanding the ending. You might walk into the ending and not understand how you got there, in other words, the first and middle parts. You might walk into the middle part of a conversation not knowing where it begins and not knowing where it ends. So these are largely fragments that you put together. And sometimes, even though we call these conversations, a lot of times they end up being closer to sayings. Well, he is not a religious leader. This is not a religion. This is a philosophy. This is an ethic. But as we try to understand the Chinese culture, ethic, and mentality in the ancient world, and going up to very recent times as well, we do have to get an understanding of Confucius, who he was and what he was about. Is this getting irritating for you to see this flashed around? Maybe I need to pull up something else that doesn't move around so much. Okay, he's a low-class person. I don't want to mean he's low-class in the sense that he doesn't have any couth. He's not good in society. No, he's very good at that. He's lower class in that he comes from grinding poverty. We have to remember this because this influences his philosophy and his ethics ever so strongly. You see, he is going to elevate people on the basis of what they do, their culture, their morality, their honesty, their integrity, much more than their birth. And he's an example that doesn't matter if you are dirt poor, that if you take your life in hand, you have a very strong work ethic, among other things, you can accomplish a great deal. We create our own future and make ourselves. Now, of course, he knows if you start out in poverty with social and economic disadvantages, it becomes more challenging to move up. But on the other hand, we should not use even grinding poverty as an excuse not to improve ourselves and do the very, very best we can to excel. We can make our own future. We can rise up by working hard. Okay, people can say, I am a cool dude because my family, man, we were so cool. I'm not talking about my family. I don't know about you, but all my ancestors were immigrant scum. Nobody came over here in my ancestry, packing gold and silver and with a noble title. That didn't happen. But there are people in China and other countries that believe a lot of what you are, a lot of your prestige in society is on the basis of noble birth. Your family has prestige. Confucius, going back to his ethic, which was already talking about, which you can be poor and move up. Good acts make you noble, not noble birth. It is a person, once again, with morality, integrity, hard work, that make you a decent human being. It's not an action of birth. Poor can be a superior person. Sure. Move up. What should you do to become a noble person, a superior person? Have virtue. Virtue. Isn't virtue right conduct? You conduct yourself in a virtuous manner. You don't lie, cheat, steal. Sure. Complete honesty. Complete honesty. That's hard to come by. Isn't it easy just to shade the truth a little bit? Yeah, a little bit here, a little bit there. Shade it off a little bit because it makes you look better. why people actually tell, shall we say, out and out falsehoods, is usually to avoid either criticism or punishment. Mommy, I didn't take that cookie. Well, who did that? Well, I don't know, Mom, but it wasn't me. You see, you don't get punished. You are free of that. But can we say, in being completely honest, you want to live your life in such a manner that you don't have to tell a fib. Don't steal the cookie in the first place. Then you're not going to have to lie about it. Therefore, can we say honesty is more than just not telling a falsehood? It's living in a manner that you will not find it necessary or convenient to tell a falsehood. There are a lot of stories about Confucius. When he started his teachings, he got a large following. Oh, there's people all over the place. There are people following him in the hundreds to gain from his example, gain from his teachings, gain from the experience. One of the reasons why he's going to be such an important figure in Chinese history is that he has a large impact. And a lot of that is his large following. So we know a lot about things, a lot of things that he did. And he's met a governor of one of these areas, one of these governors in China. And he was asked an interesting question by the governor. He said, well, how do I get my people to be honest? How do I get society to be more honest? And Confucius said, by being honest yourself. Is there sometimes the idea that perhaps what's good for me is just good for me and you can do something else and I'll do my own thing? No, no, no. You should have an example. You should set an example of honesty if you want society to be honest. It starts with me. Education for everyone. I think I have it down here. Let me get ahead. Yeah. Education for everyone. Now, Confucius had a very high opinion of his mother. And by extension, had a very high opinion of women, which is unusual this time frame. Usually women were looked down upon. His mother, even though Confucius was born into grinding poverty, she worked very hard and made very great sacrifices to make sure he got an education. Using her example as an example to him, he always thought that women could be involved in this as well, that women are capable and able of working hard and accomplishing great things. Education is a mechanism, is a means by which everybody can improve themselves. So education for everyone. Even if you can't afford it, maybe it's a good idea. We'll talk more about state support in a few minutes, that the state should make this available to more people. Governments should be honest and good. One of his statements, oppressive government is worse than a man-eating tiger. Now, there are unfortunately, there are still some tigers in Southeast Asia. They're not all extinct yet. Now, tigers don't normally eat human beings. They're not really on the menu. But sometimes if a tiger has something wrong with them, they can't run as fast, they can't catch game. They might have an injured paw, so once again, it can't catch game. And what's available, once in a while, you do have a man-eating tiger. And of course, that can terrorize your village. It can be a very big problem until the animal is either apprehended or killed. So he's using this as an analysis. An oppressive government. A government does not look out for the needs of the people through opportunity and protection. It's worse than a man-eating tiger. Going back to the idea, this is a very strong family-oriented ethic. Remember, he likes women, likes his mother. So society and family. You should always start with yourself. Going back to everyone should be completely honest. This is how it works in the world. You start with the person that improves yourself. And that goes to your family. And with the improved family, you go to the community, your town. The next step is the nation into the world. These are the steps by which we influence the world by our superior conduct. There's a term he uses. We often interpret it as gentleman. What makes a gentleman? Can we say we're sounding a little bit like nobility, that good acts make you noble? Well, good acts can make you a gentleman. And this is by behavior, honesty, integrity, like I was talking about. Ritual. Ritual is, shall we say, more closely attuned to the nature of your society, the nature of your culture. That in reality, you know how to function properly. You know how to stir your tea. You know how to eat your bread. Integrity, honesty, do the kinds of things you should to make sure all of your conduct is above board, and of course your culture. Because ritual and culture are very similar. If you're very good at ritual, you're very good at supporting the culture. I'm repeating myself. If you want honesty, be honest. You should help each other. You should support people. In this case, the state should support the people. He views the state as something that should be actively involved or actively engaged in the society to help them. A lot of times governments are looked upon as just a means of protection. You use this, the society will protect you. So if you go out in society, will keep the criminals from getting after you. It's very valuable. It'll keep you from being invaded by foreign enemies. Very valuable. But he takes it a step further. The state, with its power and its resources, should help provide for education, should help provide for the mechanisms by which people can raise up. Lower classes, I guess I'm repeating myself. I'm good at repeating myself today. The lower classes have opportunities to move up. Now, I have over here civil service. For many centuries, the way you get into civil service in China was to understand Confucius. You can take young, bright men with a good education that study Confucius for many, many years, 8, 9, 10 years. And then they take these rigorous oral examinations in front of other members of the civil service to find out that their knowledge of Confucius is not sufficient for them to gain employment. Now, I have to be suspicious. If you don't have openings, it's kind of hard to pass people for jobs that really aren't there. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that they view this such a strong ethic. They want this in society, they want this in the state. And to understand this means that you will function better in the society and the state. Well, what does this mean for modern China, the modern Chinese? The Chinese have quite a reputation for being very family-oriented. I remember reading an article, people go to China and say, why don't the babies cry? Babies cry all the time in the United States. They say, well, in China, you don't put the baby down. You're working in the field, and mama has a baby strapped to her back. When you're fixing the meals in the household, the baby's either strapped on your back or you're holding the baby up here. You might be working one hand and holding the baby, or the baby's strapped down your front as well as your back. Why cry? You have all the attention you need right now. Can we say that is very strong family orientation? Yeah, you can certainly say that. Let's look at their work ethic. Remember, I'm going back to this family that lives up the street from me. I'm fairly good friends with her husband, but this woman is from Hong Kong. And my friend told me about their children are raised now. They're raised and off with their families. But when they were being raised, he would come home from work and he'd have a note from his wife saying, oh, by the way, the daughter, I think her name was April, the daughter is going to be practicing piano for 15 minutes tonight. and she's going to spend this amount of time on her homework, and she'll spend this amount of time cleaning her room. Now, I never learned to play a musical instrument. Certainly when I came home from school, the only thing I wanted to do is lay on a couch and watch cartoons. But this person is expected now to become competent in a number of areas. This is not uncommon, it's very common. The Chinese in the United States do have a tendency now, it wasn't always the case, to go into the food industry, Chinese restaurants. These are very often family oriented. So you come in, you get Chinese food. The children after school come there and they wait table. And they bust the tables, they clean up. And they're still going to find time that evening to do their 15 minutes of piano and make sure they get their school lessons done. If you have a basic industry like groceries or restaurants, and you outwork your competition, you have a tendency to succeed. We see this, a good example is San Francisco. We see this in many other cities as well, where there's a significant Chinese element. Some of these people have been in the United States for a long time. But you go into their shops. When I was in the Navy, I used to spend a lot of time in San Francisco because the Alameda Naval Air Station is right across the bay. We also were at Treasure Island, which is in the middle of the bay. And when I'd bumming around, sometimes I would go into San Francisco. So I spent some time there. I was surprised at what I saw. People are still speaking Chinese. And immigration from China has been very meager for a long time. And they're still writing in Chinese. You go into the grocery stores and there's Chinese writing. Apparently, initially, in the hills of San Francisco, there were Chinese neighborhoods. Nearby, there might be the Italian neighborhood, other nationalities. The Chinese work very hard. They loan each other money. And after a while, even though the land is very expensive now, they bought up the nearby neighborhoods. So rather than having a Chinese neighborhood, an Italian neighborhood, now the Chinese have expanded much more broadly into the city. This stupendous work ethic. I have been told, now I'm a historian, I'm not in the hard sciences like physics and mathematics, those kind of things. But I was told I was a physics major, math major once. He said, you know, you go into a classroom, you look over there and see the Chinese, you better drop that class because you'll never be able to compete. I said, why not? They'll outwork you. They're probably better prepared because they had this experience growing up with where mommy and daddy make sure you take your math and you take it very seriously. But they'll continue this kind of work. Can we say, going back to the work ethic we see from Confucius and other thinkers, that this helps explain Chinese success in the world? Economically? Sure. Culturally? Sure. It's very important to remember Confucius. We have kind of a triumvirate, three important thinkers in China. We often speak about the first and the most important, actually, as being Confucius. He has a couple of very important followers, including Mencius and Zhuxi. As a comparison in the modern intellectual tradition of Europe, we also have a triumvirate, shall we say, the three most important, as being Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So to a certain extent, we do have a group of three that are very important. Now, as we look at Mencius, Mencius is not his Chinese name. This is certainly a name that has been, shall we say, Romanized. It looks like a Roman name rather than a Chinese name. But we remember him as being Mencius. Now, we could talk about him, and many of his ideas are very similar to Confucius. There is a tradition, I don't know if it's true or not, that Mencius actually was tutored by a grandchild of Confucius. That could possibly be, but I don't know if that's a completely accepted case. However, he's very much within the tradition of Confucius. And in talking about Mencius, we do have a very good idea that he has ideas from Confucius, but can we say he emphasizes, and to a certain extent, he expands a little bit more on Confucius's teachings. So let's look at some of his expansion ideas. People are inherently good. Can we say this is implied by Confucius? Sure we can. But Mencius makes a bigger deal about this. People are inherently good. One of the reasons why I find Mencius so interesting is this discussion is actually not dead. There is a lively discussion on the nature of human beings that's still going on today. We largely look back at the 19th century in Europe and America as, the good old days, and the progressive era comes in the 20th century, and we're making progress in industry and these kinds of things. But then we have wars. World War I is devastating. And World War II, oh my goodness. World War II, slaughters, genocide, the Holocaust. How do we explain this? I would like to see what Confucius would have said of this. Maybe he would go back to his argument that oppressive governments is your culprit. Now, I happen to be the chirpy little optimist. I happen to buy into that interpretation. But I know other scholars who argue very strongly that people are inherently evil. People are inherently no good. That's why bad things happen in the world. Well, let's take a look at Mencius and see his take on that basic argument. According to Mencius, people are inherently good. Can we say this is pro-democratic? Why would I say that? If you believe that people are inherently good, that people left to their own devices will choose that which is good, moral, peaceful, then you can allow them to participate in government, can you not? I mean, if the population can be trusted, they'll make moral choices and vote for moral people and support moral policies. Sure, democracy makes perfect sense. So his arguments, can we say, are pro-democratic in real sense. When by democratic you mean democracy means you can vote and participate personally in government. How does he make these arguments? He says to love is innate in everybody. It's nothing that you create. It's nothing that's taught to you in school. It's simply something that is part and parcel of the human being. Let's use his example. When you are a child, you instinctively and inherently love your parents. Now, we can make an argument about this. Well, you love your parents, of course, because you're absolutely, completely dependent on your parents for your survival. Sure, you can make that argument. That's a practical argument. But is not love, shall we say, a different kind of emotion? It's stronger. It's something that bonds you even more than your simple survival. I think Mencius has a very good argument in this case. I think that it's a very good idea that we look at human beings as inherently good. And one of the ways we demonstrate this is to love is innate in the individual. My best example from him is the child in the well. Let's be our little hypothetical. Let's do this. You're living in your village, and villages tend to be very similar. You have to have a water supply, don't you? If you're getting water out of the river, you can get river mud. And if it's a yellow river, you get silt in it. So one of the best sources of water, of course, is the well. Almost every village will have a well. You'll dig a hole in the ground. You come down until you get to the water table. And at the water table, the water will seep into the well. And then you get your bucket, and you might have it on a rope or something. You throw it down there, and you pull up. Now you have your water. You have your drinking water, your water for cleaning, your water for cooking. Every village has a well. And let's be hypothetical. Just put yourself in this position. You're there in your village, and you look over and you see a small child. Maybe it's just learning how to walk. Maybe it's just crawling. Its ability but it does have the ability to move. And you look over there and you see the child's going toward the well. You know that if the child takes another step or crawls a little bit farther, it's going to fall in the well. And it's going to die. It's going to be killed. The fall will kill it. How do you react? What do you do? Go like this? Go, wow, man, this is my chance. I get to kill a human being. Nobody's watching. Let me go over and take my foot and push him in, and I get to scream and watch him die. Oh, isn't that wonderful? And now for many years, you see, parents never get over the death of a child. I can watch this family, watch mom cry and dad bereave for year after year, and I have the wonderful satisfaction of knowing that I caused that. Is that how you would react? According to Mencius, we would all react the same because we're innately good. We would see that potential dangerous situation with a great deal of alarm and concern. And we would do everything within our power to keep that disaster from happening. We might even put ourselves in harm's way, where we could be hurt ourselves to save that child. How would you react? That's how I think that's how I'd react. Were you taught that? Are people taught to be alarmed when disaster looms? No, I think it's innate. I think Mencius is right. Now we come to the third one. Confucius, Mencius, and Shungxi. Once again, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but normally this is how it's spelled, Shungxi. Little bit later than Mencius, little bit later. Once again, he's Confucian in a lot of his ideas. So I'm not trying to talk about him and repeat that. But he takes a very different approach than does Mencius on the nature of human beings. Rather than saying people are inherently good, he says the nature of man is evil. What's his evidence? Look at the dates. Look at the dates. What's going on when both Mencius and Shungxi are alive? Let's go up to their dates for the Warring States period. This is an area, this is not peace, this is not tranquility. This is not moonlight and roses. This is devastation, this is loss of life, this is destruction. Under that time frame, it is actually a little bit surprising that you have Mencius coming out with an optimistic view of humanity. On the other hand, it's not terribly surprising that you'd have a philosopher like Shungxi come forward and say, the nature of man is evil. What's his evidence? Look around. Look at war. Look at pestilence. Look at the kind of things that human beings do to each other. So is he going to give up on humanity? Not quite. Because he says now people must be trained to be good. While Mencius says goodness is innate, people must be trained. It can be from your religious leader, it can be from your school, it can be from your society. But people have to be taught to be good or they will be evil. Can we say from his standpoint that he's anti-democratic? If you believe that human beings are inherently evil, if you believe that human beings are just plain bad by nature, are you going to allow them? Are you going to give them the opportunity to participate in a wider manner? Are they going to be able to participate in society? Are they going to be able to participate in government? You can't trust them. They've got to be controlled. They've got to be taught to do something which is good. One of my problems with his arguments, and you can see I'm philosophically in disagreement with them, but one of my problems is, well, if everybody has to be trained to be good, then who trains the guy on the top of the ladder? He has to be trained to be good as well. And who's he? Well, it's got to be somebody on top. It's like the prime mover. Who's the good guy on top of all this that teach people to be good, unless there is somebody who's innately good or good by nature. I don't like Xunzi, but he's hard to dismiss. It's hard to say, well, it just doesn't work that way. However, I do believe in Mencius. I'm the optimist. I believe that people are inherently good. Now, we're talking about the Warring States period a little bit earlier. And look at the dates. We call it the Qin or Qin. Essentially, the Warring States period ends in about 221 BC. Why is this? For the simple reason that the last man standing in this brawl is the Qin, also pronounced as Qin. Not only does the Qin or Qin, it's kind of fun what I had before, wasn't it? Notice that it is the Qin that not only brings peace, but he unifies China as well. Now, we call it a dynasty even though we really only have one person. That's a ruler that, well, I'm saying this wrong. Yeah, we do have more than one person. But it's a short dynasty. You can see it doesn't last very long. Qin, Qin. Does Qin look a little bit like China? Probably the origin of the word China, which we associate with this nation, comes from the Qin. Bring peace. That alone would be a stunning accomplishment after so much war. China unified, okay, unified under, you see it's grown quite a bit since the Shang. It's quite large. It's not quite as large as modern China. We really have to wait until the Han, shortly after this time frame, before we have the Chinese largely encompassing the geographical areas of China. That alone would be quite an accomplishment. But unfortunately, the Qin, and that's Qin Shi Huang, is the first emperor he's also from the Qin dynasty. Whoa. He's not a nice man. He is a very bad man. He wants all Chinese history and Chinese civilization, for that matter, to start with him. But there's been Chinese records going back many hundred years before this time frame. How can he make sure that everything begins with him, because he's the most important person? Destroy them. Burn them. Get as many records as you can and destroy them. Now, remember I said that some of our records on Confucius are incomplete. I don't know how thoroughly Qin Shi Huang went after the records of Confucius. But I want to say I'm glad that we do have what we have. And we're running low on time. I'm going to have to leave you at this point. Let's make sure I'm telling you true. Yeah, we're getting short on time. I'm going to have to come back and revisit Qin Shi Huang next time and give you a pretty good idea about some of the things that he did and attempted to do. And at least at that point, we can at least start talking about the Great Wall, which is perhaps the most well-recognized structure in China. But I have to wait until next time. In the meantime, whatever you're doing, I hope you're enjoying yourself. You're good people, and I'll talk to you again later. And remember, Mencius was right. I'll talk to you later.